Well, welcome to Healthy Chats with the Doc with Dr. Brooke Leverone. Yes, today we're going to talk about the fat gene and how our genetics affect obesity and that expanding waistline.
Yeah.
So that's, now that I'm getting a little older, I didn't used to always be a problem, but it is interesting. I have noticed that both my parents do have some of that issue. So I go, I wonder, is this genetic and that kind of a thing. So
Right.
can your genes make you fat? Should we start there?
Yeah. So it's not the genes per se that make you fat, but they do increase the risk of obesity. And we see that there is a lot in your environment that is going to affect whether that's going to be a factor or not. But there are individuals who do have certain genes that those individuals in the same environment as somebody who doesn't have that gene is going to have a higher likelihood of obesity and difficulty losing weight. So there is definitely a genetic component to that picture.
Yeah, so it's interesting. So when you do the research, I mean, depending on the article, it can show, studies show somewhere but on the low end, 25%, on the high end, 80%, that certain genetic factors play into obesity and being overweight. And there's certain genes like the FTO gene, kind of referred to as the fat gene. So what do those specific SNPs? I think the studies show there's 400 different SNPs that are genes that relate to that, but there's more targeted genes like the FTO gene. Tell us how does that work?
Yeah. So, okay. So there are, if I can, that was a lot of information. So we do see in the research that there is up to an 80% increase in your risk of obesity based on your genetic factors. And they are seeing that there's about 400 different genes that are contributing to your risk of obesity and difficulty losing weight. They're still trying to sort of isolate all, fully understand all of these different genes and also how the environment and the genes interplay to increase your risk. So we've talked about this a lot, right? It's not just your genes, it's also the environment that you're in, and you have the power to be able to change the expression of these genes and modify your risk. So there is environmental influence, and then there are also these genes and how the two come together. And then there's also some that we understand a little bit better than others, like the FTO gene. So the FTO gene, there's the FTO gene, then there's these things what we call thrifty genes, which I'll get to in a minute. But the FTO gene is specifically related to your appetite control. So individuals that have a genetic variance in the FTO gene on average eat about 200 more calories per day which is like a small meal or extra snack, and over the course of a week, that's 14 extra 100 calories, 2,000 extra calories, over the course of a week. So these individuals, there is a modification in that reward center. So they don't feel satiated with a meal. It's funny, we were talking about this earlier. I have that darn FTO gene, and I joke with my husband because him and his mother both, they don't eat very much. They eat very small portions, and I'm always like cleaning my plate, and I'm like, why aren't you? I'm like barely satiated, and you barely ate half your meal. So you'll just see that there's just this increase in caloric intake with this gene that is clearly, we see in the research, this one's clearly correlated with our increased risk of obesity, which, I mean, it makes sense, right? If you're eating more than, more calories, more fat storage, etc. So
yeah, it's really fascinating. So, there really is a genetic component, like we always talk about. You have a genetic predisposition that's uniquely who you are. Embrace it, but really understand it, because let's talk a little bit about the science we love so much, epigenetics, and that's your environment affects your gene expression. So when it comes to weight loss and obesity, the importance of lifestyle. And I think there's been a lot of studies, right, that show twins separated at birth and that had different environments growing up and those types of things. But also in your research, you found a new term. So talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So, there was one article that was talking about our genetic risks, but they were specifically talking about how it's not the genetics alone, it's also the environment. And they called it an obesogenic environment. So two individuals in the same environment, but one person has the FTO gene, the other person doesn't. The one with the FTO gene is going to be more likely to have obesity with a higher increased risk there because of the obesogenic environment that they used, which kind of speaks to, we will see trends in obesity in families, right? So we'll see, if your parents struggle with obesity, there's a high percentage rate that you're going to also struggle with obesity too. And part of that is basically because you're inheriting your genes from them. So you may be inheriting the FTO or, one of the other 400 genes that are associated, but also thinking about what that environment is like. You're both in the same environment. So you're eating some of the same types of foods and exposed to the same types of, maybe environmental toxins, et cetera, that then regulate the on and off switches of these genes. So there's that component as well, to that environmental component as well too, that definitely plays a role, that the obesogenic environment.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I mean, I grew up on the Iowa-Minnesota border, and we played out in 20 below in our snow forts. We didn't have, I think, Pong when I was a kid was the first game. Today kids, sit behind on their couch and they play games and they're on their phone.
Right.
And when we were kids, we were running around the woods and
totally
doing different things, right? So
well,
that's
even
an
in San Diego
factor,
where we
right?
we play at the beach. Yeah, that's an environmental factor, getting outside. And so we think about the epidemic of obesity in children, and that's a big deal. And we do see that there are a lot of environmental factors that are contributing to the epidemic of obesity in children. Some of it, yes, is genetic, and some of it is because the environment is sort of turning on some of these genes inappropriately because of exposures, but then also lifestyle. Diet and nutrition is really important. I mean, it does always come back. Like even with the FTO gene, we see that you can help modify your effects of the FTO gene by utilizing the Mediterranean diet. That's been actually studied a lot to be helpful with some of these genetic variances. Also, the Mediterranean diet has been studied to be the most easiest diet to follow for anybody who's trying to lose weight. It's really intuitive. People are satiated, they're satisfied, and it's providing a lot of healthy nutrients, and it's low fat and low glycemic index, or low sugar, in other words, which is really a key component to that. And so, doing things like just being educated around nutrition and finding the right diet to eat is really important for that. So, there's that kind of big role, as we mentioned, with the diet, and then the proper nutrients. We always talk about the, methylation, turning on and turning off genes, toxin exposures that are inappropriately turning on genes. But then, the sedentary lifestyle. We do live in a sedentary world. Especially in the last year, right? I mean, we've all been Zooming and in front of our computers and not, getting up and getting around. And especially with kids, and especially this last year with the poor kids. But with the advent of the computer and the video games, that's highly, what's the word I want? It's hard to get them away from it, right? Because they're addicted, there's a big draw to that. So certainly that's going to be part of it as well too. But, you can have two kids who play video games all day long, but one is more likely to be obese if they have some of these genes versus the other one.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about processed foods related to kids and even yourself as an adult. So, McDonald's, I mean, not to call out anybody, I shouldn't have called out a fast food, but processed foods, they
They're
have
gonna be knocking on your door
and things. Yeah. So
we do find that, you are what you eat. We talk about this all the time. So processed foods that you want to eat to as close to the sun as possible, right? So sun makes plants grow. You eat a fresh plant that's close to the sun. A cow eats the plant. You eat the cow. You're only 2 steps away from the sun, right? But then you get whatever processed in a packaged bag with all kinds of ingredients you don't even know what they are. You're pretty far from the sun. But the reason that can be problematic is because these extra chemicals like food coloring, food preservatives, highly fried foods, all of these things have been shown to increase oxidative stress in the system, which when we have an increase of oxidative stress in the system, that's going to create damage to the DNA. and to the point where it's just going to change the expression. So in some of our previous talks, we talk about how the DNA is wrapped really tightly in what are called histones, or the epigenome, excuse me, it's wrapped really tightly. It's called the epigenome. And there's all these little structures on there called histones that help open and close the epigenome to expose the DNA for that gene to be expressed or not to be expressed. Toxins can bind to those histones and then change where the genes are opening and closing, literally changing your DNA expression. So again, you are what you eat. And so we see this in our processed foods, our high sugar foods, our chemicals and preservatives, and etc. Unfortunately, I mean, and I know it tastes good. I mean, I love me a good fast food French fry. Don't get me wrong, but it's, like moderation on the road trip to somewhere else. Do you get that? Not like on your, day-to-day meals. So, being aware of what we're consuming in our environment is also really important for affecting our genetic expression, which does play a role as well with these specific genes that we're talking about, the FTO and some of those other ones. There's also these things called thrifty genes. There's all these other genes, they call them thrifty genes, which I find really interesting because essentially in earlier human times when food was scarce, if you had these genes, you were more likely to store that food more efficiently. So store it as fat, which meant longer survival in times of famine. And so that was a favorable gene to have back in the day. But obviously we live in a society where food is ubiquitous. You can go out and get a 99-cent cheeseburger with 3,000 calories in it. So we're not short on our food supply. So unfortunately, these thrifty genes are not working for us because they're storing on all that fat. They're, ooh, look at all this I can store, right? So the goal is to be, you've got to be aware that you are what you eat, that healthy nutrition really is important. And in this particular talk, it's twofold important, right? Because we're talking about one, it has to do with just getting in proper nutrition, eating close to the sun, reducing oxidative stress, low glycemic index, low fat diet. That's going to lead to healthy metabolism and just feeling good all the time. But two, we know that healthy food affects positive gene expression, and that bad food, those preservatives and those high fried things negatively affect gene expression. And if you happen to be somebody that has the FTO gene and some of those other genes, then that's really going to compound your risk and increase your obesity. So this is what we talk about. It's like just being focused on what your body needs. Like, okay, so I have the FTO gene. So even more so do I want to be aware of eating my fruits and vegetables and not eating packaged processed foods and not eating, fast food and things like that, which is sort of general recommendations for everybody in general, right? But for individuals with these genetic expressions is going to be a big player in helping them to stay ahead of that and helping them combat that stubborn weight that just won't go away.
Yeah, that's great because a lot of people, eat for your genes is kind of a trendy kind of a thing, and so it's important, but also, we're much more complex than just because I have the FTO gene. It's a good thing to know, but right. There are other genes that interplay, right? So that's why we look at, the metabolomic pathway or the metabolic pathways and
right.
and those types of things. If it was that easy, we probably solve it a lot easier.
Right. I know. So it's not just that easy. Yeah. It's not just that easy. Right. And it's like, so we, of course, epigenetics, we have that metabolomic panel, which looks at some of these fat genes. And while the FTO is a big one, there's also ones that affect how your body processes fat at the mitochondrial level and in the liver, and increases fat storage because you maybe genetically don't process that fat very well, which may mean that you aren't somebody who should do a ketogenic diet, which is super popular and trendy. So if you're anybody out there who has done the keto diet and has not had success on it, it's not your fault. It may be your genes. You may be somebody some people just can't do the keto diet. Keto diet can work really well for a lot of individuals, but some people it doesn't. And sometimes it's because those genes just really want to store that fat or don't process fat efficiently through your system because of your genetic makeup. So then you just don't do the keto diet. You do the Mediterranean diet, like I just mentioned. Yeah.
the whole personalized nutrition. So, right?
Yeah,
We
exactly.
need to eat
Exactly.
for who we are.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And that's, that's one of the things I like about the Metabolic panel is I can look at it and be like, okay, yeah, you are somebody who can't do the ketogenic diet. Or I can look at it and be like, ooh, no, dude, that's not going to work for you. We need to work on your pathways to processing liver fats through the liver and mitochondria. And you need to be low sugar and low fat, not high fat. So, being able to dial that in for people can be really helpful in helping them find what works for their genetics. To help with that stubborn weight loss.
Yes. Well, here we are again, a little over, but so takeaways are, genetic predisposition can definitely affect your weight loss or your weight gain.
Yeah.
Make sure you get to a functional medicine doctor and have them look at your gene expression and create a personalized nutrition plan for you.
Yeah.
And don't worry that if you have the FTO gene, I think I have the dark chocolate gene if there is one.
There's got to be a gene for that. Yeah.
You have it and you just need to work around it, right?
Right, exactly. There's lots of things we know to control the expression and work with what you got. It's just about making it personalized with what you got so that it works for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not against you.
Well, Doc, have a wonderful week. And
thank you very much
for all that great information.
Yeah, this was great. Okay, we'll talk to you guys.